Good morning, everyone. Welcome to what is going to prove to be a very exciting panel discussion. My name is Gregory Skinner. I work for a consulting and research company called Escalent. I'm VP of Strategic Insights. And today we have a panel where the discussion topic is the 360-degree perceptions on EV adoption. Just to explain a little bit about what this is all about, certainly EV adoption is what we hope to be rampant, but we have some people waiting on the sidelines. We have some people who are all in. So today our panel is going to discuss different perceptions on what EV adoption is all about, the challenges, the hurdles, and what we anticipate seeing in the future. Just a quick introduction of who we have here. We have Charlotte Argue from Geotab. We have Nate Shadoin from Mike Albert Fleet Solutions, Yann Kulp from EIQ Mobility, and Lucas Lowden from Escalent. Let me give each of these people a chance to introduce themselves more specifically. I'll call them out, and then we'll just jump right into the discussion. So Charlotte, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, yeah, happy to, and thanks, Gregory. It's really great to be part of this event and the panel. So I'm Senior Manager of Fleet Electrification at Geotab, which is a global leader in telematics. And what we do is we offer a platform for connected vehicles. So we take data from the vehicle's onboard systems, we take GPS, acceleration data, information from the environment and other devices, and bring it all into one location to help fleets turn that data into insights and take action on their operations. My role with Geotab, I've been working in the EV space for about a dozen years now. I joined Geotab 2.5 years ago, and part of my role includes building confidence around EVs using data. So looking at aggregated or macro insights from all of our connected vehicles and making sure we're contributing to the global efforts into fleet electrification and decarbonization.
Fantastic. Thank you, Charlotte. Nate, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Nate Shadoin, and I work for a Cincinnati-based full-service fleet leasing company called Mike Albert Fleet Solutions. And we actively pursue electric vehicle fleets in addition to our combustion fleets. We've been doing EVs now for almost 10 years. And I have a client-facing role. I go after new business opportunities, but I also assist our existing client partnership managers that manage the fleets that we have in-house when there's an electrification interest or need. So I do a dual role there. And again, it's nice to be with everybody.
Fantastic. Let's go clockwise. Lucas.
Great. Thanks, Gregory. Lucas Lowden with Escalent. I'm the Insights Consultant for the Automotive and Mobility team and Program Lead for the Fleet Advisory Hub program. Been with the company about 15 years and really about the last 5 or 6 years really immersed in the commercial vehicle and fleet space, especially working with fleet decision makers to understand their opinions and perceptions around forward-looking business technologies like telematics, data analytics, and ironically enough, fleet electrification.
Fantastic. Yeah, tell us about you.
Yep. Hi, my name is Yann Kulp. I'm the co-founder of a company called EIQ Mobility. We are the leading provider of fleet electrification advisory in North America. We've now assisted over 150,000 vehicles in determining if EVs are possible for them technically, economically, what are the right vehicles, what are the right chargers, the total cost of ownership and emissions outcomes. So really processing lots of data and using our proprietary software to accelerate this. And we're now part of NextEra Energy, the largest clean energy developer in the world, based out of Florida. As you can imagine, electrification of fleets means really providing really powerful, resilient infrastructure for charging and clean energy. So that's what we do.
Great. It's funny that you said that it's out of Florida. Immediately, I think everybody thought Germany or someplace in Europe. So it's amazing that it's actually here in the U.S.
Yes, the largest in the world, based out of Juno Beach, Florida. Extraordinary company.
Great stuff. And just to introduce myself, my name is Gregory Skinner. I'm a VP of Strategic Insights at Escalent. I'm also leading our fleet foresight package, where we pull back the curtain and get to the voice of the customer for in the area of fleet. And we're exposing a host of different insights and information that you wouldn't typically have access to. All right, so let's jump in, panel. Let's level set this just a little bit, because it's a pretty diverse market out there. So let's talk a little bit just about state of the nation. You know, if you give me just a couple of quick thoughts on where you think we are on this adoption curve when it comes to fleet, you know, that would really help us sort of put all of this into perspective. Does anybody want to kick it off? Yann.
Look, so I think over the past 3 years, we have seen, maybe even less than that, maybe a couple of years, we've seen a massive change from vehicles being a consumer vehicle, right, sedans for consumers, to a fleet world. And just over the past 12 to 18 months, the number of OEMs who've announced investments and vehicles dedicated to fleet applications, so pickups, delivery vans, semi, school buses, etc., is mind-blowing. And this aggregate industry, you know, I think this is Bloomberg data, is committed to $250 billion, right, of investment just for the US market. So in terms of production, it's not there yet, right? It's early days. But the sheer magnitude of what's arriving is, I think, way bigger than a lot of people sort of, know.
Yeah. Lucas, are you seeing something similar?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the term that comes to mind for me is still nascent today. Really kind of still early adopter stages, but it's poised for significant growth, and it's for a lot of the reasons talked about yesterday, and what Yann just mentioned. The product pipeline is chock full. Infrastructure is falling into place. Battery technology and chemistry advancements are, alleviating some of those historical concerns of the fleet decision makers. There's a whole ecosystem of new products and services that are popping up that will help to support that. And, coming along like we haven't seen in a long time, much of it on the back of an asset that a lot of this panel holds near and dear to our heart, and that's data. And so, certainly there's roadblocks and challenges that remain for both the fleet decision makers and product and service providers. But there's a lot of really smart folks working on it in the industry and putting a lot of time and energy against it.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're talking about us, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Charlotte, what are you seeing?
I completely agree. I think for the commercial vehicle space with EVs, I think we're just at that cusp of, everything's coming together. And I think we're about to see a very substantial shift in, from pickups to medium and even heavy duty electrification, whereas before it was really focused on, passenger cars and transit to a degree as well. But yeah, Yann mentioned the vehicle availability, that piece is all coming together. Where a few years ago, you had very, very limited options, and today, just in the last year, I think over 40 different medium duty EVs are now available compared to a few years ago where it was a handful. In addition to that, we're seeing pretty strong and ambitious policy coming in. So that's another driving force, whether it be on the infrastructure side, infrastructure bill, or even the sales mandates, such as California's clean truck rule. And then on the demand side and the customer side, a lot of pretty large fleets are making significant commitments to electrification, and even putting in pre-orders in the thousands, if not tens of thousands of vehicles. So it's really, the demand is there, the supply is catching up, and we're about to, in the next few years, I think it's going to happen a lot faster than most people realize.
Right. Nate, how about you weigh in on this?
Yeah, I agree with everything everybody's already said. I would also add that in my time in the industry, which is only about 8 years, there's more new startup manufacturers and new players in the market than I've ever seen. You've got Lordstown Motors, you've got Rivian, you've got Electric Last Mile Solutions. They've all gone public. Rivian hasn't yet, but they will. You've got Lightning E-Motors, who's a converter. And a lot of these companies are going to market, or they're going public through a SPAC. So it'll be very interesting to see how it all plays out over time and who survives and who doesn't. In addition to that, you have the traditional OEMs like Ford and General Motors, and some of the European brands as well that have committed to electrification and bringing those products to pipeline. So it will be very interesting to see competitively who makes it and who does not over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, so, I'm just going to throw this question out there. From your perspective, or each of your perspectives, what would you say are the most significant hurdles that exist when it comes to EV adoption? Because as I mentioned earlier, to Charlotte's point, there are people placing huge orders, but there's also a lot of different enterprises and companies who have very much a wait and see strategy. So what would you say are the biggest challenges when it comes to EV adoption right now?
I'll jump in quick. I think that it varies. To be honest, there's a bit of a duality among fleet businesses of the small operations and then larger operations. The smaller operations, they're a little bit more risk averse. They're not they're shopping through dealers. They have much more of a retail oriented shopping process, and so those folks look a little bit different than the large enterprises that might have that direct relationship with the manufacturers and service providers. They're able to be a little bit more risky, and they have staff that are able to investigate the tech, engage in pilot testing, and really manage to KPIs that some of the smaller enterprise they don't have the scale to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Is that if you look at the top 500, maybe not even, maybe the top 100 fleets in the US, the massive ones that everybody knows, Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Amazon, etc. These guys have infinite resources and strategic planning capabilities to go and help them navigate this. And it's not easy for them either, but they'll figure it out. But the reality, as probably a lot of people on the call know, is that the fleet industry is a really long tail, and most, to Lucas's point, most fleets, run 50 or 100 vehicles, or a couple of hundred, or a couple of dozen, and they don't have the bandwidth or the institutional expertise to go and hire, people to figure this out. And so the decision process is really important. And for us, this is why EAQ was founded in the first place, is to unlock the decision process that then enables fleets to make EV decisions with their eyes wide open. Right? What are the right vehicles, the right chargers? What's it going to cost me? Is it going to work? Where should I start? All these big questions that are really critical for a fleet operator, right? You can't fail.
Yeah. Charlotte, you specifically, specialize in helping company through the use of data and analytics, helping companies in that adoption process. What's your point of view?
Yeah, no, I agree with Yann on that as well. And also Lucas in that the challenge for fleets is going to be different depending on the fleet, the industry they're in, the size of their fleet, what their motivation is, where they are physically, like if they have access to resources, if they have access to incentives. So it's really hard to answer a question of, what is going to be the biggest challenge for fleets, because the challenge is going to really depend. I think for those early fleets in the first stage of transition, it's really about, identifying where it makes sense, answering all these unknowns, which it's brand new for. Some of the questions that they have to answer is brand new when you're looking at EVs. And Yann gave a great list, including, understanding what the capacity or capability of these vehicles are and the range and where it fits, what the TCO is. So that's where, data of your ICE vehicle fleet can really help answer those questions. But I think like for scaling, it's a bit of a bigger challenge because EVs require a completely new relationship with fueling. So, you have to also execute an electrification strategy that comes along with a charging strategy. And so this is going to require collaboration from the fleet manager with your facility managers, with your utility, with your electrical engineers, understanding, how do I make the most of the capacity that I have? Do I need transformer updates? How long does that take? In some cases, it may take years for the utility to make those upgrades. So from our perspective with the telematics, I think understanding vehicle duty cycle and how far those vehicles actually go in a day, and do they all come back to base at the exact same time, that kind of information needs to inform a charging strategy as part of the overall electrification plan. And today, that level of expertise doesn't exist in fleets, and particularly in smaller ones, but even the larger ones, I think, is a challenge.
Yeah. Yesterday I did a presentation that basically touched on a lot of the different things that each of you are talking about. So it's interesting to know, when we look out in the marketplace, we know that there's a high level of interest. But yesterday was all about, there are so many challenges, regardless of if you're a large fleet operator or even the smallest, and all these considerations that reside in the background that are really, tangible hurdles to adoption. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but it certainly means that right now there's more questions than answers.
Yeah, and I think that just, if I may, there's a couple of things of interest, right? Certainly the complexity of the variables, right, are unknown, right? New OEMs, to Charlotte's point, the infrastructure, all these are things that haven't been done before. And so parsing through all this, choosing the right players, making decisions. Right? The fleets are mission critical assets, right? So they have a job to do. And so consumers, to some degree, can make irrational decisions, which is what we do, right? Some of us buy nice cars versus cheap cars, and that's okay. But fleets really have, that sort of mission criticality, where from a operation and budget perspective, failure is not an option, right? Or it's not good for your career. I think the second point, which is new, is exactly what Charlotte was alluding to, is that you're engaging many more stakeholders within the industry, right? You could, prior to this, you could be in your own silo. I take care of my fleets, I take care of fuel purchasing, I'm good. Now you have to work with the energy team, you have to work with the facility team, you have to work with HR, you have to work with the CFO. And so now suddenly your internal stakeholders become much more numerous than before. And that's a whole new MO for fleet leaders.
Right.
Yeah. And I think one of the points that touches on, Yann, is the idea of comprehensive and transparent information to help these fleet decision makers. We hear it from those decision makers a lot, that there's a lot out there, but it's not stitched together. So much of this is new, and it's regularly evolving, and so it's a roadblock, but it's also a big opportunity as well. Let's be honest, there's a data and information economy evolving in front of our eyes. And so, that's something that stands out there that needs to happen, both for the vehicle lifecycle management, but also a broader business change management, because Gregory touched on it yesterday, there's a paradigm shift. Yesterday's business isn't the business necessarily of today, or certainly not tomorrow. And there relies a disconnect of perception versus reality, where, one of the studies we did, 80% of adopters realized that there was at least some change required to their business operation to integrate EVs. And only 30% of those folks that aren't shopping or have them in the business think that they need to change the business. That's dramatic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's huge. That sort of disconnect is significant. Nate, I feel like you sort of deal with this sort of challenge on a day-to-day basis, just helping clients manage that information, looking at the market a little bit differently, and then coming up with those solutions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, a lot of the barriers, I think, definitely come down to charging. I think Yann made a really good point that you have more stakeholders involved within an organization now that have to be aligned in order to make that first step towards EV adoption. In the past, a lot of hesitancy came down to range of vehicles, range anxiety, they called it. Especially on some of the consumer or passenger vehicles, those things have become alleviated because of the battery technology and longer range. I think in a big way, a lot of it comes down to right now is having tried and true brands that people are familiar with and can count on, that have a service and dealer network available, like Ford, for example, that are bringing vehicles that people use today, like light duty cargo vans, pickup trucks, to market that have near cost parity of an internal combustion equivalent. So right now, if you wanted to go out and get a cargo van or a low cab forward truck that you could put a body on, a box truck of some kind, you would have to go to a company that does conversions. And those vehicles tend to cost 2 to 3 times more than a combustion. So the TCO doesn't really pencil out unless you have some type of grant funding. But the good news is here in the next couple of years, you're going to have those traditional manufacturers bring those vehicles to market. You'll also have scalability on the conversion side, like Lightning, e-motors, C-Electric, that are going to bring their costs down. And coupled with grant funding and things of that nature from certain states, legislatures, it makes it a little bit more feasible, and the ability to take that step, which is risky, especially if you're a smaller company. A lot of that's becoming mitigated over time.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing, though. I remember you talking not just 10 minutes ago, during the introductions, mentioning that a lot of the players in this market we've never heard of before. They're startups. They're pushing boundaries. They're bringing new things to market that we've never even seen before. Where do they fit in this scenario?
It's a great question. I mean, you look at Lordstown Motors, for example, who's bringing a crew cab, 4-wheel drive, half-ton pickup truck to market. It doesn't have a lot of features on it. It's designed for fleets. That would be a great vehicle for somebody to make that move to say, hey, we want to do a pilot program, replace some of our work trucks with this. Their hurdle is Ford just came out with the F-150 Lightning that's going to come to market next year. It's the same exact spec, but it costs less money. So, when you think about that just on its own, and the riskiness of somebody making that adoption to electrification, it makes it even more of a steeper hill to climb for somebody like Lordstown. When you look at somebody like Rivian, for example, who is backed by Amazon, Cox Automotive, and Ford, they're very well funded. Most of these companies, from what I can tell, they all face the same challenge that John DeLorean faced in the late 70s, early 80s, and it's having enough capital to acquire a factory, develop a new product, employ all the people that are necessary to do that, begin production, and then get all of the supply chain and the manufacturers there to basically ship you the product when you haven't recorded $1 of revenue. Everybody kind of faces, and it's a mountain to climb. So I think when you look at Rivian, who's bringing a consumer product to market, but then also has the commitments from Amazon to do the last mile delivery vehicles, I think they're very, very well positioned to be successful going forward.
Yann, how would you reconcile that? Because, as someone who's helping clients navigate through this, is it that you're looking to the large players, or is it, hey, maybe take a bit of a risk and go with someone who's bringing newer technology, but might be an unknown?
Yeah, so we work with some of the OEMs, and in that case, of course, we're going to be recommending, we're only going to be, looking at feasibility for their own EV models, right? But when we're working directly with a fleet, we really don't recommend, makes and models, right? What we're doing is we're looking at the specifications of the vehicles in the market, the pricing. We're factoring in, charge speed and charge time and climate that impacts battery performance. And then we're narrowing down the scope of what is actually possible for the fleet to adopt. Then the actual decision among, let's say, if there's 3 OEMs, the ones they are really going to pick and choose and run with is something that they are, going to have to do on their own or with their leasing company, right? Their FMC. When we try to stay away from actually saying, hey, you should use this one versus another, in part because there's just not enough data for us to do that. We're very data driven. And so if we were 5 years from now and we had history of performance of certain of these vehicles, we could now add a lot of that. But making recommendations based on paper documentation is not a way of doing business, or would not be doing a service to our clients. Now, I think what is interesting, though, is that if you look at the history of fleets, there are upfitters, right? There are spec vehicles, typically a UPS vehicle, which might be a utility master with different chassis, etc. And so in the fleet world, look at what I think its rival is considering doing with Uber, right? It's creating a specific Uber rideshare vehicle, electric, specifically for a fleet. And so I think that might be kind of an interesting new arena, or what Rivian is doing for Amazon, is actually creating custom platforms that are built specifically for a particular fleet use case. I think for some of the newer OEMs, this is going to be a really big avenue versus trying to go mass market.
Yeah. Now, as long as we're talking about this, as long as we're on the subject, one of the questions I have here is this idea of corporate strategies or an OE strategy. And I'm not sure if you can comment on this or not, and this is to the group. But given the variability of demands that exist out there, like we all know that every single fleet is different. How should any manufacturer or any technology provider or solution provider even start thinking about this market? So, putting on your consultant hats, if you had to dispense some advice, what would you say the strategy should be in sort of dipping their toes into this market? Charlotte?
For me, Gregory, I think that, one of the big things, obviously, product on the road, putting rubber on the road, it gets the brand out there, builds awareness. And collective market erodes a perception of, I need to see more. You used that data point yesterday of 40, 50% that can see it, but I need to see something more from it. So that's a big facet. I mean, marketing, obviously important, necessary for building the upper funnel awareness and further distributing that information we touched on earlier. And I think awareness is one of the challenges that many of the startups face. Mm-hmm. We did a recent brand electrification study that insert startup brand lagged all of the legacy brands. Right. Loyalty is a big thing in this industry, and Yann touched on the data-driven methodology of EIQ. That's very rational. While business decision making differs from the retail decision making, small businesses particularly still have that emotional aspect to it. That loyalty is a thing still, and even beyond that. Arguably above all is the customer experience. What we continually hear is product manufacturers and service providers need to help customers and prospects alike to help themselves in order to create raving fans. They need to help those decision makers in business make it easy for them.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think a lot of those new OEMs that are focused exclusively on EV, not a lot of them only sell the vehicles. They're starting to get more into the consulting area, or providing almost a turnkey solution. So working with charging providers and having a consulting branch and a telematics branch, so that they can really help support customers through the entire journey. Which is a different angle, right? A different perspective of what the role of the OEM is. One of the OEMs that we work with, they actually send prospective customers our telematics device to pull information from several months of data, and then that way they can provide a better recommendation on which trim level, which battery level, what charging recommendations they have. So yeah, providing a bigger picture. And these customers are going to be looking for that kind of support. So I think that's can help them give an edge to their services and to their products.
Yeah, I would speculate. I'm not a expert by any stretch of the tiered a model of automotive in North America, with dealers. but a number of the new OEMs are direct to customer, right? And again, maybe consumers might be okay with this, but I think if you're a fleet, operational reliability, access to service, access to parts, access to advice is really important. And being able to do that, if you're focused on, a dozen or a few dozen really large fleets, you can do that in-house. The new OEM can run that. But if you're dealing with a wide spectrum of potential fleets across North America, having a robust dealer and service network is important. But for each of those dealers, it's not only delivering and servicing vehicles, it's also now going to be the infrastructure and advisory services, because the OEM in many cases doesn't have the scale capacity to do that for thousands of fleets, right? So some of the support mechanisms that the big OEMs are doing or the new OEMs are doing for their major clients has to be outsourced or delegated to the real fleets in America, which have a few dozen or a few hundred vehicles, and I think that's a really interesting and difficult role for dealers.
It sounds complicated. It sounds very complicated, convoluted. There's a lot of considerations. Imagine that I'm a small fleet owner. So, I don't know, I have 15 pieces of equipment. And I come to each of you and I say, you know what? I don't know what to do. Should I just wait? Should I just wait to see how this is all going to shake out? Because I feel like in the next 12 months, things are going to change dramatically. How would you respond to something?
Gregory, let me jump in here real quick. So this is something that I encounter on a regular basis because we work with those fleets that, like Yann said, the more traditional, where they have a couple dozen vehicles or whatever it is, up to a couple of hundred. What we would do is, and we're a reseller of Geotab, so we would either provide them with the Geotab device, or if they already have a telematics provider, then we would want to track some data over 3 to 6 months and determine how far those vehicles are driving and where on a daily basis, so you can back into the range. And then once you figure out what the spec of the vehicle is, so if it's a delivery vehicle or if it's a pharmaceutical sales rep that's out in the field or whatever it may be, then you would do an analysis and look and see what type of electric vehicle equivalents are either available today or will be in the next 12 months that would match up with the duty cycle of that vehicle. And then can that vehicle live within the daily range that battery can provide? And then the next step beyond that would be, if you do have to charge, where do you do it and how do you do it? So is it a depot charging? Is it a take-home charging? Is there available public charging that you could use in a backup situation? That type of stuff. So just trying to keep it simple, as in how many miles are you driving? What are you doing with the vehicle? Can you get an EV that will accomplish both of those things? And that's how you can get comfort in taking that step forward.
Others, what would you say? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think there's an argument of, by not looking into EV, you're quite likely leaving money on the table, even without price parity today. On passenger side, this is very we did a macro analysis using our EV suitability assessment, but on all of Geotab's light duty vehicles in US and Canada, and it showed that 2/3 of those vehicles would be saving money and had a comparable EV that would be range capable. So essentially 2/3 of those vehicles would save the fleet money today if they were electric. It gets a bit more complex with medium and heavy duty, because then you have to take into account payload. And so that's why you have to really drive into the duty cycle and performance needs of that individual fleet. But even beyond the TCO argument of today, I think fleets are going to find themselves in a big disadvantage by not testing the waters. And maybe that means if they have a passenger vehicle in their fleet, starting there, don't start with the biggest truck in your fleet, start at the easy wins. There's a lot that fleets can learn by just trying out. And all these vehicles, regardless of class, the majority of them are going to be at price parity at some point in the next decade, And when that happens, if you haven't done your learning and if you aren't ready to take advantage, your competitors are going to be, saving money on operating costs. They're going to be, ahead of the game, whereas you're going to be catching up. So that's what, do the easy wins today. Use data to find where those easy wins are, and that's going to set you up for success as these vehicles, as the industry is ready for commercialization.
Right. Well, okay, let me play devil's advocate because I'm excellent at doing that. So I hear what you're saying. I hear what all of you are saying. But I'm a small fleet owner. So taking on one or two of these vehicles is just going to be a pain. It's going to be a pain to me because first of all, I have to think about acquisition. Then I got to think about where am I going to charge this thing? It's basically going to disrupt my business and I'm not really that interested. And then beyond that, I go, okay, so let's say I try one and I like it, but I've got 50 vehicles in my fleet. So now I got to scale it up to 20 or 30. That's a whole different ball game than having one passenger car driving around. So now what? Now what's the solution?
Yeah, well, look, I get it, right? Well, first of all, waiting for history to happen and just getting hit in the head is not a great business strategy, right? So, I mean, granted, it is painful, but if you don't want pain, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur or you shouldn't be in business, right? You go and become a school teacher, and even that is painful because, and I know it, my wife.
I'm pretty sure that's pretty painful.
Yeah, my metaphor was terrible there. My wife was a school teacher, and it's not easy either. So my apologies to all of you who have teachers in the family. But you get my point, right? This is life, right? Business is complex, and you have to deal head on with opportunities and problems, right? And so, like dealing with the pain or not wanting to deal with the pain is not really usually a really good business plan, right? But the reality is that everything Charlotte said is completely correct. This is happening. The economics are going to become a real competitive disadvantage if you don't convert. If you factor in mandates, right, which are coming across at federal and state level, then the carrot and the pressure, it's going to be a really big carrot and a really big hammer or stick that are coming your way. So I think you don't have a choice. And there's another factor is that there's not enough production of fleet vehicles to deal with demand, right? Like the Ford proudly announced that they're doubling their production of F-150 Lightnings to 80,000, but I don't know, they sell a couple of million a year, right? So it's still a tiny portion of the 150 that are just pre-ordered as of today. So if you don't get in the game now, you're going to be late, and then you can't catch up because there's not enough production for 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah, Lucas, do you have any data or anything to support the notion or idea that now is the time to jump in, or now is certainly a time for intense consideration of this technology?
Yeah, I mean, we have done some studies where the folks that are shopping those ones out, collecting information, conducting cost analyses. I mean, they're looking 18 months out, 12 to 18 months generally. The folks that are we call them non-considerers, are saying I'm just not looking at them right now. Yeah. They still see it as inevitable. On around average, they're saying 2 or 3 years, I'm probably going to have these units in my fleet. I mean, the biggest thing is doing the diligence. That you're not just diving right in. You're not going to run out to the dealer, grab an EV, and come back to the depot and plug it in.
Right.
And that's where doing the diligence, taking the learnings from some of these early adopters and pilot tests, work with your partners and providers to help them, to help you understand what those learnings have been. And you have to know your own business, your own framework, and take that and say, Mr. Manufacturer, Mr. Service Provider, here's what my business looks like. What and where can I make this work? And it's easy for me to say, right? But you just have to dip your toes in the water before it's too late.
Right. Can someone comment a little bit, at least, on all of the competitive platforms that exist? So certainly, the focus right now is on EVs. prior to us getting on this panel, we had a side conversation, and some of us were at the Advanced Clean Tech Expo, and EVs were battery electric was predominant, but there are certainly other options that exist out there. If we're talking hydrogen, we're still talking gas, we're talking clean diesel. There's all sorts of different things that someone who's considering alternative powertrain could look at. So how do those other technologies factor into the consideration of choosing a battery electric or something else?
I mean, for my perspective, not a lot. I think as was touched on yesterday when we were talking about the comparison of battery electric versus fuel cell, there's certain applications in the immediate term where these things fit, and I think for things like CNG and LPG, it's similar. There's use cases and applications where it fit. Among our Fleet Advisory Hub profiled audience of fleet decision makers, there's less than 5% penetration of CNG and LPG. So it's and those have been around for a while. It's not like those are going to take anybody by surprise at this point. So, it's really the future. It really does look like BEV and fuel cell in the near term, with technically much broader promise over the long run.
Yeah. I also read something yesterday that said when it comes to long haul, so the larger classes, and actually it might have been someone speaking, the challenge or the focus is going to be on hybrids, not on pure electric. Is that something that you're hearing? Are you hearing rumblings about that, Nate?
Yeah, I mean, we don't do a ton of Class 8 vehicles, but when you just consider how much weight that those vehicles are carrying, and especially, on highways and things like that, which highway usage and going up hills, not down hills, and cold weather are kind of the biggest drivers of battery depletion. I think a hybrid system only makes sense in the big rig trucks in the near term. In the longer term, once battery technology catches up and you can actually contain that much energy within the chassis or the trailer of the vehicle, that could be different. But I think for right now, I see a hybrid application. I'll give you an example. Police cars sit in idle most of the day, or at least a big part of the duty cycle is idling. When you go from a Ford Interceptor, which is basically an Explorer in gas, to the hybrid equivalent, you go from 11 to 20 miles a gallon, just right there by being a hybrid. That to me is the easiest way to get fuel economy up and greenhouse gases down in the over-the-road trucking industry.
Right. Okay. So we're going to wrap up and get to the Q&A. But before we do, can I have each of you just really quickly talk about when we think of the sort of short, medium, and long term, where do we see EV adoption going? Like, where do you anticipate it heading, let's say, in the next 36, 48 months?
I personally see last mile delivery as a business segment or an industry that is ripe for electrification, especially in urban areas. I think you're going to have legislation that's also going to mandate certain companies in certain areas use electrification for last mile delivery. And that's one area that I see a lot of growth potential in the near term.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add to that, like service tech and sales reps, right? Think about the pharmaceutical industry. There's a massive push for decarbonization of their operations. Their ESG goals are huge. Some of them are members of EV 100. So that whole segment is, I think, going to move pretty quickly. All the more that there are some kind of nice, exciting vehicles for sales reps, that are coming to market. So that's going to happen, pretty quickly also. And I think the third, another category is going to be anything that's related to sort of state fleets, climate mayors, counties, cities, states are aggressively pushing, and just New York and California, their own state fleets are gigantic, right? Now, I think that the caveat to this topic is and I think I think it was FedEx stated this well, is what is the percentage of vehicles on the road versus percentage of EVs acquired in a given year? Because vehicles have a 10, 12, 15-year lifespan, right? And so even if, I think it was FedEx said, we will now acquire 50% of our new delivery vehicles will be EV by 2025 in every purchasing year. But for their entire fleet to convert to EV will take a decade or more because of just the sheer lifespan of vehicles.
Right.
I think, I would add just to that list of short-term is terminal tractors and kind of port-related services. But yeah, I agree with the list. I would say for short-term, it will also be region-specific. So in areas where we see incentives or where we see supportive utilities or sales mandates, low emission zones, those kind of things, that's where those, the highest uptake will be. And that just makes sense given, I think the technology works, and we've heard this through the last couple of days. The technology is there, but most of the barriers are going to be policy related or institutional related, and fleets trying to figure it out for themselves. So it's not going to, the limitations not going to be in the technology, particularly in those classes. For medium term, it's going to be the medium duty regional haul, or regional or interregional freight. Beverage industry, food delivery. The crystal ball is with the long haul on when that's going to be figured out. But
just a side note on the long haul. I think it was the DOE did a study on freight, and I forget the number exactly, but I think it was something like 65% of freight is shipped less than 100 miles. And so there is another dynamic happening, is that nobody wants to be a long, over the road truck driver.
Right.
And so there's a really strong dynamic towards multimodal, where the trucking pattern is really, Port of LA to Walmart distribution center, sort of back and forth, where employees can, be at home.
Right.
So I'm not an expert in this, but I suspect that there's actually a lot of what we see as big trucks on the highway are actually really local trucks, not, going from Texas to, Oregon.
Right. Lucas, what's your point of view?
Honestly, I in terms of tangible use case, I don't have a lot to add than what the group here has shared. I think taking a different view. I mean, it's clear it's a race to establish a foothold of infrastructure and products in the market. I think services are going to rapidly evolve to support these early deployments, and looking out beyond the next few years. Really, the learnings of these early adoptions are going to scale to bring the technology and the ecosystem to the masses. I can see, the ecosystem, consolidating. We see a lot of partnerships and M&A activity even today. I can see that continuing and really even accelerating as we look ahead.
Right. Awesome. Okay, fantastic. This is such a great conversation.
I'm sorry, Greg, my apologies. One last comment.
That's what you said last time, Yann.
I know. But I find what they do pretty cool. If for some of the folks on the audience, if you haven't seen what NACFE is doing, the North American Council on Freight Efficiency, they do a program called Run on Less, and they're currently testing, I think, 13 EVs, with from BYD and Volvo and Daimler and etc. and EV trucks, right, and yard goats and etc. And so just go and track what they're doing. They're online. This is really interesting, right, because they're retesting vehicles in real life applications. So just a good resource.
All right, perfect. Okay, let's get to Q&A. So I got at least a couple of questions here. First one is from Victor Voda, and he has a question about electric motorcycles for commercial use in highly populated areas. That's certainly something that we have not really heard a lot about. We always think class 1 to 8, but we don't think about different body types or even vehicle types. does anybody have a point of view on if there's going to be, if we're going to start to see the development of these sort of alternative vehicle types in use in maybe more dense urban areas?
So I would say that, yeah, there are electric motorbikes available, and I've seen a few in police situations to trial them out. I would actually expand that from a fleet perspective. In addition to electric motorbikes, there's a huge opportunity with electric cargo bikes. So those trikes and even just electric cycle bikes. So if you think about a situation with, you have a lot of staff going in and out of meetings, you don't necessarily need to be bringing along cargo. Maybe it's within 5 miles in the urban center. Like you can save a lot of time and money by, instead of taking out a vehicle, taking out one of these smaller vehicles. So yeah, I think there's a huge role and a huge place for them. And I think it's pertinent for fleets to come at their electrification strategy and their overall sustainability strategy from a holistic perspective. So where do you actually right size your vehicles? Where do you actually need a pickup truck versus where maybe a cargo bike, if you're delivering within a certain radius in the urban center, may make more sense.
Yeah.
And similar to that, Charlotte, one of the things that I sticks in my mind is when I was reading the press releases and the unveiling of BrightDrop, the GM electrified commercial brand, the electrified pallet. They have this in order to make life easier for delivery drivers, where they're able to get close enough, and then that's that last 100 feet is the electrified pallet. I found that fascinating.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, kudos to Victor for bringing that up and sort of spurring this notion that, we need to think beyond sort of contemporary vehicles that exist and the modes and modalities that they offer, because there's certainly opportunities that go beyond that meet the needs of people in the market. Okay, we have another question here. This one's from William Ahmed. My perspective of this whole market is that I believe it to be too saturated for the current stage we are seeing with the EV market. Will this not create a survival of the fittest situation where 5, 10, 20 years down the road, there's too many, will this not create a survival of the fittest situation 5, 10, or 20 years down the road? To then be beaten out by a franchise brand or a dealer like a Ford, CDJR, etc. Does everybody understand the question?
I think what William is alluding to is probably no different than what happened to the automotive industry at the turn of the century, the last century. If you're interested, go to Wikipedia and look at the number of auto manufacturers that existed in the US or North America since 1895, right? And hundreds of manufacturers of vehicles existed, and some of them lasted 4 years and built 12 cars, and essentially now only 3 have survived in North America. So it's not unreasonable to believe that this is going to happen in China, where I think there are 300 or 400 manufacturers out there, and maybe in North America, right? That some of them will die or get acquired or integrated, and there'll be some form of consolidation.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I work with a lot of different manufacturers. We have access to acquire vehicles from basically everyone, both new and existing. And I don't think there's any question that it's absolutely a survival of the fittest. And again, to be capitalized enough to survive just to get going is very, very difficult. And when you consider that some of the manufacturers that are in the space right now are really converters, so they're taking an existing combustion chassis and they're converting it to electric. What happens when the vehicle that they're converting, what happens when that OEM decides, we'll just go ahead and build this in-house because we have 5 years of experience behind us with some other vehicles. What happens to those companies? And the question is, it probably doesn't look good. I don't know the answer to that, but those are some of the situations that you can just see coming down the road.
Yeah. We could argue that, and again, this is another great question. So thank you, William, for asking this. We could argue that we need these iconoclasts in the marketplace. Like we need these market disruptors. It's almost like a sad situation for it to be condensed and consolidated back down to the big players,
Right.
Because then perhaps, we don't have that same sort of progressive thinking that these guys are bringing to market. Tesla is notorious because it's the one who went, hey, guess what? We're not playing the game of everybody else. So what do we do to support that sort of, I'm going to call it like almost like a cottage tech industry to make sure that the EV market continues to evolve?
Well, that's right. I think, Gregory, to me, it seems like it's just sort of a natural evolution, and this is where, looking back to what Yann noted about the legacy industry and seeing how it progressed through, the 19th through the 20th century, and find ourselves here today. I mean, it's almost natural to have this explosive expansion. And then there's going to be a little bit of contraction where things kind of, the water finds its level and things normalize. And,
right.
If you look out at the ecosystem, I mean, there's another technology right around the bend that is going to throw everything into disruption again. It's autonomous vehicles. And
Right.
that's going to build up and out from electrified vehicles, connected vehicles, data. That's the next generation of disruption, is going to be autonomous vehicles. And there's a whole new batch of new and unique players in that realm that are going to expand away from this.
Right. All right, my friends. On that note, we're going to wrap up this session. It's been fantastic talking to all of you. I love the perspectives that you're bringing. The title of the panel was 360-degree perceptions, and I think together all of you brought that to the fore. So thank you for doing that. For anybody watching this, if you want to get in contact with anybody on the panel, including myself, I believe if you go up to the little icon at the top with the people and you click it, that you can DM people who are attending the conference or specifically who are on this panel. And I know Lucas and I are headed over to the booth, the Ask the Expert booth for Escalent, and you can get in touch with us over there if you'd like. So thank you all for joining, and hopefully everybody watching enjoyed this discussion.